The blast tore through the morning silence like thunder made of fire. 1 second, Sergeant Claire Donovan was leading her squad across a dusty irrigation ditch in Kandahar province, boots sinking into soft earth, sweat dripping down her brow beneath her helmet, and the next, her world erupted into a storm of dirt, fire, and shrapnel. The shockwave threw her back so hard she swore her spine had snapped in two. When the dust cleared enough for her to breathe, she realized something was very wrong. Her legs didn't answer when she tried to stand. Claire looked down. Her uniform was shredded, blood pouring from both thighs, flesh twisted and mangled in ways no body should ever look. She had been close enough to the buried IED to take its fury, but not so close that it killed her outright. Her rifle had skidded 5 feet away. Her ears rang so loud she thought she'd gone deaf, but voices broke through the static. Her men shouting, chaos erupting, gunfire sparking in the distance as insurgents sprang their ambush. She pressed her hands into the dirt, dragged herself forward an inch, then another, grit grinding into her wounds. Her breath hitched in short, desperate bursts, the metallic taste of blood on her tongue. Somewhere behind her, Specialist Ramirez screamed in agony, his own body shredded. The squad was pinned, enemy fire raining from the ridge. Claire blinked through the haze, her mind slamming into one clear truth. They were caught in a kill zone, and unless someone called in an airstrike they'd all be dead in minutes. But the radio was slung to her back. She clawed toward it, each pull sending lightning bolts of pain shooting through her spine. She cursed, spat dirt, and kept dragging herself across the field like a wounded animal. Her training screamed at her, "Don't stop, don't think, move." The distance between her and the ridge seemed to stretch into miles. Every burst of AK fire kicked up sand a few feet away, some bullets striking so close she felt the dirt spray her face. She ignored it. 40 lives depended on her. Behind her, Corporal Jenkins shouted, "Sergeant's down. We need medevac." But the call was swallowed by the rattle of machine guns and the deafening cracks of RPGs slamming into mud walls nearby. The enemy knew what they were doing. They weren't just trying to kill soldiers. They wanted to wipe out the entire patrol before reinforcements arrived. Claire reached the radio, her fingers trembling as she pulled it free and clipped the headset to her ear. Blood soaked the handset, made it slippery, but she tightened her grip and forced her voice steady. "This is Reaper 2-1, troops in contact, heavy fire, requesting immediate air support at grid." Her words cut off as another RPG slammed close, dirt raining over her. She ducked instinctively, then continued, spitting grit from her teeth. "Grid 247 by 165. Danger close, repeat, danger close. We are pinned and losing men, how copy?" Static hissed, then a calm voice replied, "Reaper 2-1, this is Hammer 5, copy Grid 247-165. We're inbound EDA 6 mics. Hold your position." Oh. Claire nearly laughed, a sharp, broken sound in her throat. She looked at her squad. 2 men were bleeding out in the ditch. Jenkins was firing blind, his M249 spitting rounds in short, desperate bursts. Private Keene was white as a ghost, his helmet tilted askew, clutching at his shoulder where blood streamed through his fingers. These weren't hardened killers, they were kids who trusted her to get them home. She keyed the mic again, voice dropping to a growl. "Hammer 5, we don't have 6 minutes. We'll be dead in 3. There was silence, then the reply, "Understood. Adjusting. We'll be there in 3. Mark your position with smoke, confirm color." Claire dug into her vest, fumbling until she found the smoke grenade. Her hands barely worked, shaking from blood loss, but she yanked the pin and hurled it forward. Purple smoke began to rise, curling into the sky like a desperate signal. "Purple smoke, how copy?" she rasped. "Solid copy, Reaper 2-1. Stay low." The squad held their ground, trading fire, but the enemy pressure was relentless. Bullets cracked overhead, smacking into the mud walls and sending splinters of clay into the air. Claire pulled herself beside Jenkins, who looked at her in shock. "Sergeant, your legs, Jesus Christ, you're—" "Shut up and keep firing," she snapped, her voice steel even as her vision swam. She propped her rifle against the dirt, aiming from her belly, and squeezed off rounds toward the ridge. Each shot steadied her. Each trigger pull reminded her she was still in this fight. 2 minutes. She just had to buy 2 more minutes. The insurgents pressed harder, sensing their advantage. A squad of them broke cover, rushing down the slope, rifles blazing. Claire saw them, adjusted her aim, and fired, hitting one in the chest. Jenkins dropped another. But more poured forward, shouting, firing, pushing closer. "Frag out." Keene croaked, lobbing a grenade that tumbled short but still blasted 2 insurgents into the air. The squad roared approval, adrenaline momentarily drowning their fear. Then the sky ripped open. The sound of jet engines screamed overhead, followed by the shriek of ordnance dropping. Claire pressed her face into the dirt as 2 precision bombs slammed into the ridge, fireballs erupting, shockwaves flattening brush and sending enemy fighters flying like rag dolls. The air stank of smoke and cordite. The gunfire sputtered, then fell silent. Hammer 5's voice crackled through the radio. Splash on target. Ridge is clear. You're good to exfil. How's your squad holding up? Claire let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She looked at her men, bloodied, shaken, but alive. Every single one still breathing. She keyed the mic again, her voice softer now. 40 souls intact. Thanks to you. But when she tried to sit up, her strength gave out. She collapsed into the dirt, vision tunneling. She heard Jenkins calling her name, distant like through water. The last thing she saw before blacking out was the purple smoke curling higher into the sky, mingling with the rising fire. When Claire woke, she was on a medevac bird, the roar of rotors filling her ears. A medic leaned over her, hands pressing hard on her legs, trying to slow the bleeding. His face was tight with focus. Stay with me, Sergeant. You did good, you hear me? You saved your squad. Now let us save you. She tried to nod, but her body felt like it was sinking into the stretcher. Her thoughts drifted, memories flashing. Her first day in uniform, her father's proud smile when she graduated basic, the laughter of her squad around a fire pit last week. She wasn't ready to leave them. Not yet. The medic's voice snapped her back. You're tough as nails, Sergeant Donovan. Don't quit on me now. She clenched her teeth, forcing herself to stay awake. If she passed out again, she feared she'd never wake. She thought of her squad's faces, their trust in her, and forced the words out past cracked lips. Don't let them forget me. The medic frowned. Forget you? Hell no. They'll remember you as the badass who crawled through fire to save their asses. Now shut up and breathe. That's an order. For the first time since the blast, Claire let out a weak laugh. It hurt like hell, but it reminded her she was alive. And as the helicopter lifted them away from the battlefield, she realized something else. Surviving the blast wasn't the end of her fight. It was just the beginning. That night, in a field hospital, Claire drifted in and out of consciousness as surgeons worked on her legs. She caught fragments of voices, words like shrapnel embedded, bone shattered, possible amputation. Each one sliced at her, but she refused to let fear take her. She had stared death in the face and crawled through fire. She wasn't going to break now. When she finally woke for Rayall, Jenkins was sitting beside her cot, his arm wrapped in bandages but his grin wide. You're awake, he said, relief flooding his voice. Damn, Sergeant, you scared the hell out of us. But you pulled us through. I owe you my life. Claire studied him for a long moment, then gave a faint smile. You don't owe me. You just owe the next fight. Don't waste what we bought out there. His grin faltered, replaced by respect. He nodded slowly. Roger that. And in that quiet moment, Claire realized the war wasn't just about survival. It was about what came after, the choices that would define not just her but every soldier who walked behind her. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't done fighting. Not by a long shot. The scream of engines tore across the sky, a sound sharper than hope itself. Sergeant Emily Carter, half slumped inside the battered comms truck, forced her eyes upward through the shattered windshield. 2 streaks cut across the Afghan sky, jets diving fast, their bellies heavy with ordnance. She pressed the radio handset back to her lips, blood crusting around the corner of her mouth. Echo Squad marking position, she rasped. With her free hand, she tore a smoke grenade from her vest, yanked the pin with her teeth, and hurled it out the broken window. Purple smoke blossomed, curling upward in a vivid cloud against the haze of battle. Her squad cheered faintly at the sight. She heard McBride's voice break through the chaos, yelling for everyone to get down. The enemy fire surged as though they knew what was coming and were desperate to crush them before it hit. Emily clutched the radio tighter. Danger close. I say again, danger close. The jets roared overhead and then the world erupted. Bombs fell like thunder from the gods. The ridge line where the insurgents poured down vanished in a blossom of fire and earth. Shockwaves slammed against the convoy, rattling vehicles and throwing dust in choking waves. The noise was deafening even through the ringing in Emily's ears. She felt the truck shudder as though the ground itself wanted to swallow it whole. When the first wave of explosions faded, silence lingered for a fraction of a heartbeat. Then came the second strike. Missiles screamed down, ripping through the remaining positions. Enemy gunfire faltered, then vanished completely, swallowed by fire and smoke. Emily blinked through the dust. Her chest ached. Her body felt hollow, every ounce of strength drained. But she forced herself to keep the handset close. Echo Squad, she croaked. Status check. Sound off. Static filled the line, then voices one by one cutting through. McBride, alive. Daniels, voice trembling but steady. A few others. She counted quickly. They'd lost Rodriguez for sure. 2 others weren't answering. She didn't dare hope. Her throat tightened, but she shoved the grief down. Not now. Not while her squad still needed her. Air support complete. The pilot's voice crackled through the radio. You're clear to exfil. Recommend immediate withdrawal. Withdrawal. Emily wanted to laugh. Her legs were mangled wreckage. Withdrawal for her meant bleeding out in the dirt. But she swallowed the thought. McBride appeared at the truck door, covered in dust and grime, his helmet cracked. His eyes went wide when he saw her. Jesus Christ, Carter. She bared her teeth in something like a grin. Still alive. He climbed in, hands trembling as he tried to assess her wounds. His face hardened when he saw the extent of the damage. Your legs. Forget my legs, she snapped. How many do we have left? His jaw tightened. 12. Out of 16. Her gut twisted. She thought of their faces, the ones who hadn't made it. But again she pushed it down. We can still move. We still have the vehicles. 2 Humvees are operational. The rest are gone. Then load the wounded and get the hell out. We've got a narrow window before they regroup. McBride hesitated, his eyes flicking to her legs. He didn't want to say it, but she knew the thought in his mind. She'd slow them down. She was dead weight. Don't you dare, she growled. I'm not getting left behind. He met her gaze, the battle-hardened sergeant and the stubborn soldier locked in silent war. Then he nodded sharply. Fine. We'll rig a stretcher. Not a stretcher. Too slow. She forced her voice stronger than she felt. Strap me in the Humvee. I can still shoot. I can still fight. For a moment he looked like he might argue. But there was no time. He called over Daniels and another private, and together they hoisted her from the truck. Pain like white fire tore through her, and she bit down on her tongue so hard she tasted iron. They strapped her into the back of the lead Humvee, propping her against the gunner's mount. She clutched the M4 in her hands, forcing her trembling fingers to stay steady. Outside, McBride barked orders, rallying what remained of Echo Squad. They loaded the wounded, grabbed what supplies they could, and prepared to move. The convoy rolled out, engines growling, tires crushing dirt and debris. Emily kept her eyes on the horizon, scanning for movement. The air was thick with dust and smoke, the ridge line still burning. Every shadow looked like an enemy fighter ready to rise again. Minutes stretched like hours. Her body screamed with every bump, every jolt, but she refused to close her eyes. Then it happened. A shot cracked, slamming into the Humvee's side. Another followed. The convoy jerked into defensive formation. Insurgents had survived, scattered pockets hidden in the hills. Emily braced her rifle, teeth clenched, and returned fire from the window. Each shot rattled her bones, but she forced herself to stay sharp. She caught one enemy trying to flank, dropped him with 2 bursts. Another darted from cover, and she nailed him before he reached the road. The firefight raged as the convoy pushed forward. Bullets smacked into metal, sparks flying. A rocket-propelled grenade whooshed overhead, missing by inches. Daniels swore from the turret, blasting away with the .50 caliber, the heavy thud-thud-thud cutting through the chaos. Emily barked into the radio. Keep moving. Don't stop. The lead Humvee bounced hard over a ditch, nearly throwing her sideways. She gripped the rifle tighter, vision swimming. Every nerve screamed, but she refused to let go. Finally, after what felt like forever, the hills thinned. The road opened into a wide valley. The insurgents' fire weakened, then fell silent. The convoy roared forward, leaving smoke and chaos behind. Inside the Humvee, silence fell, broken only by labored breathing. Daniels slumped against the turret, eyes wide with shock. McBride's knuckles were white on the wheel. Emily leaned back, exhaustion crashing over her. They'd made it out. Barely. Hours later, the convoy rolled into the nearest forward operating base. Medics swarmed them instantly, dragging out the wounded. Emily fought as they tried to pull her from the Humvee, her voice raw. Check the others first. Don't waste time on me. The medics ignored her, lifting her onto a stretcher. She screamed as the movement tore through her shredded legs, but bit down and refused to let the sound last. She caught sight of Rodriguez's empty seat in the Humvee and felt her throat tighten. Inside the field hospital, chaos reigned. Dozens of wounded from different skirmishes filled the space, medics shouting orders, machines beeping. They wheeled her into a corner, and a doctor immediately began assessing the damage. "You're lucky to be alive," he muttered grimly, examining the shattered mess below her knees. Emily barked a laugh that tasted like salt and blood. "Lucky's not the word I'd use." They pumped her with morphine and the world blurred. Voices became muffled, faces hazy. She drifted in and out of consciousness, catching fragments of conversation. Might lose both legs. Survived an IED and an ambush? She called the airstrike herself. Her mind floated. She thought of her squad, of their faces in the smoke. She thought of the ones who hadn't come back. She thought of the ridge exploding under the jets. And somewhere in that haze she wondered if she'd done enough. When she woke again it was dark. The hospital tent was quieter. McBride sat beside her cot, slumped in a chair, helmet resting on his knee. His eyes were bloodshot, his face drawn with exhaustion. "You look like shit," she rasped. He snorted, the sound rough but genuine. "Says the one with no working legs." They both laughed, though hers broke into a cough. The humor was bitter, but it was something. "You saved us out there," he said after a moment, voice quieter. "If you hadn't crawled to that truck, we'd all be dead." She looked at him, the weight of his words heavy. For the first time since the blast she let herself feel it, not just the pain but the pride, the grief, the raw, tangled mess of survival. "We saved each other," she said. He nodded, eyes glinting in the dim light. But she saw something else there too, something unsaid. "You're not telling me everything," she whispered. McBride hesitated. His jaw clenched. "Two of the guys are still unaccounted for. We think they might have been taken." Her heart stuttered. Taken. Alive maybe. Captured. The room felt colder suddenly. Captured. The word burned in her mind. She pictured their faces, young, scared, unprepared for what captivity meant in this war. "We're going after them," she said firmly. "You're not going anywhere," McBride said. "You're done, Carter. Your legs." "To hell with my legs," she snapped. "I'm not leaving them behind." Her voice shook with fury, but underneath it was something deeper, resolve, raw and unbreakable. She'd crawled 200 meters on shattered bones to save her squad. She wasn't about to sit on the sidelines while two of them suffered in enemy hands. McBride didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, something like respect and sorrow tangled in his eyes. Finally he stood, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Rest," he said. "We'll talk tomorrow." She wanted to argue, but exhaustion pulled her down. Her eyelids grew heavy. As the morphine tugged her into darkness, one thought echoed louder than the rest. She'd survived the blast. She'd saved her squad. But the war wasn't over. Not for her. Not yet. Morning came with the sting of antiseptic and the hum of generators. Sergeant Emily Carter woke to find sunlight cutting through the canvas of the field hospital, painting pale streaks across her cot. The pain in her legs was dulled by drugs, but every throb reminded her of the truth. Shattered bones, shredded muscle, a future permanently altered. She pushed herself upright, groaning against the ache. McBride was gone. The chair beside her sat empty, a coffee cup balanced on its arm. Voices murmured outside, soldiers moving, trucks idling. The war never paused, not even for the broken. A medic noticed her stirring. "Easy, Sergeant. You need rest." "Rest doesn't bring my people back," Emily shot back. Her throat was dry, her voice gravelly, but her will hadn't weakened overnight. The medic gave her a look that blended pity with irritation, then moved on. Emily ignored him, swinging her gaze to the tent flap. Every cell in her body screamed to get up, to move, to do. But her body betrayed her. When she shifted her legs even slightly, a bolt of pain shot upward so strong she nearly blacked out. She cursed under her breath. The frustration was worse than the pain. To be sidelined, useless, while two of her soldiers sat in enemy hands, it gnawed at her insides like fire. The flap rustled and McBride stepped in. He looked like he hadn't slept, eyes rimmed red, uniform still stained from yesterday's fight. He carried a map folder under his arm, the weight of bad news clear in the set of his jaw. "They confirmed it," he said without preamble. "Lance Corporal Hayes and Private King. Both taken alive. Drone footage shows movement toward the hills north of Sanger Valley." Emily's stomach dropped. She pictured Hayes, the lanky kid barely out of high school, who'd once spent a whole patrol talking about his mom's apple pie recipe. And King, quiet, steady, the one who always volunteered to carry extra ammo without complaint. She clenched her fists. What's the plan? McBride hesitated. Higher command's evaluating options. Intel suggests the hostiles are moving them deeper into contested territory. Could be handed off to another cell by tonight. In other words, Emily snapped, we're running out of time. He nodded grimly. Then we go now, she said. His brow furrowed. You're not moving anywhere, Carter. You can barely sit up without passing out. Her anger flared. You think I'm going to lie here while Hayes and King get dragged into some cave, tortured, or worse? No. I led them out there. I'll lead the mission to bring them back. McBride slammed the map folder down on the cot beside her. God damn it, Carter, this isn't about pride. You're a liability in your condition. You know it. She met his fury with her own. You saw me yesterday. You saw what I did. I crawled 200 meters with my legs blown to hell, called in fire, and saved every single one of you. Don't tell me I'm a liability. Silence stretched between them, heavy and tense. McBride's jaw worked, his chest heaving. Finally he dropped into the chair, rubbing his face with both hands. You're insane, he muttered. Emily leaned forward, ignoring the pain lancing through her. Maybe. But I'm not leaving them. For a long moment, McBride didn't answer. Then he pulled open the map folder, spreading the chart across her lap. Red circles marked the valley, the ridges, and a series of cave complexes stretching north. Scouts say they're holding them here. He tapped a cave near a narrow ravine. Small outpost, maybe 20 fighters. More if reinforcements arrive. Emily scanned the map, her mind already racing through possibilities. They'll expect us to hit from the south, the main trail. We come in from the ridge line instead. High ground, element of surprise. McBride eyed her. You're not letting this go, are you? Not a chance. He exhaled hard, then nodded reluctantly. Fine. But you stay in the command Humvee. You coordinate, you call shots, you direct. You don't set foot in that cave, understood? Her mouth twitched in a grim smile. We'll see. Preparation moved fast. By evening, Echo Squad was rearmed and refitted. The 2 remaining Humvees stocked with ammo, medical kits, and water. The air buzzed with a mixture of tension and determination. Every soldier felt the weight of the mission. They weren't just striking back. They were rescuing family. Emily oversaw the briefing from her cot, her voice sharp, steady, her eyes burning with purpose. Hayes and King are alive. That's all that matters. We go in fast, silent, and we don't stop until we've got them back. Rules of engagement are simple. Do whatever it takes. Her soldiers nodded, faces grim. Daniels clenched his jaw, fingers twitching on his rifle strap. We owe them, he muttered. Night fell and the squad rolled out. The desert stretched endlessly under the moonlight, shadows long and sharp across the sand. The engines hummed low, headlights off, their convoy moving like ghosts across the valley. Emily rode in the back of the command Humvee, headset pressed to her ears, scanning comms chatter. Her legs were strapped tightly, painkillers dulling but not erasing the agony. Sweat slicked her back despite the cold night air. McBride drove, eyes fixed on the horizon. Daniels manned the gun, silent for once, scanning the darkness with restless focus. The closer they drew to Sanger Valley, the tighter the silence grew. Everyone knew what was at stake. Everyone knew what failure meant. At the staging point, a kilometer from the enemy outpost, the Humvees halted. Engines clicked as they cooled. The squad dismounted, checking gear in the pale moonlight. Emily stayed in the vehicle, frustration burning as she watched them prepare. McBride crouched at the hood, voice low. We split into 2 fire teams. Daniels takes the left ridge with 3. I'll lead the assault team on the right. We breach the cave, secure Hayes and King, then fall back to the vehicles. Fast and clean. Emily keyed her mic. Remember, they'll have lookouts. Eliminate them quietly. No heroics, no noise until you breach. McBride gave her a quick nod, then moved out. The squads melted into the night, dark shapes blending with the rocks. Emily's heart pounded. She hated being left behind, hated the helplessness of sitting in the Humvee with her broken body. But her voice, her eyes on the comms, still mattered. She clutched the radio, listening as the teams advanced. Left ridge clear, Daniels whispered over the net. Right flank in position, McBride reported. Emily's knuckles whitened. Proceed. Minutes crawled by. Then a muffled grunt over the radio, followed by static. Her chest tightened. Report. Lookout neutralized, Daniels said, voice strained. Moving on. Relief washed over her, but it didn't last. A sharp crack split the night, a rifle shot too loud, too close. Then shouting erupted in the distance. Emily's stomach dropped. The element of surprise was gone. Move! Move! McBride barked. Gunfire exploded across the ravine, muzzle flashes flickering like lightning. The cave mouth lit with fire as insurgents poured out, shouting in Pashto, weapons blazing. Emily's headset filled with chaos, shouts, curses, the rattle of gunfire. She clenched her teeth, gripping the radio. Stay on mission. Push through. Get to that cave. Through the windshield, she saw shadows darting across the ridge, muzzle flashes sparking. The fight was too close, too chaotic. Her blood boiled. She couldn't just sit there. Not while her squad bled for her orders. Ignoring the screaming protest of her body, Emily hauled herself forward. She gritted her teeth, dragged herself to the open door, and pulled her rifle with her. Carter. McBride's voice barked in her ear. Stay in the vehicle. Negative, she growled, crawling into the dirt. I'm not sitting this out. She propped herself against a boulder, rifle steady in her hands. Her legs were dead weight, but her arms were steady. She picked a target, an insurgent moving to flank McBride's team, and squeezed the trigger. The man dropped. Carter, damn it. McBride shouted. Keep moving, she shot back. I've got your cover. Adrenaline surged, drowning out the pain. She fired again, cutting down another. Her squad pushed forward, fueled by her defiance. Minutes bled into chaos. Grenades thumped. Bullets ricocheted. The cave mouth loomed closer, flashes of gunfire sparking from within. Inside. McBride roared. His team surged forward, disappearing into the darkness. Emily's chest heaved. Her vision blurred. But she held her ground, firing at any shadow that moved. She couldn't go in, couldn't be there with them, but she could damn well make sure they had a chance. The radio crackled. McBride's voice, ragged but fierce. We've got them. Repeat, we've got them. Relief slammed into her like a wave. She almost laughed, almost cried. Hayes and King were alive. But then the gunfire doubled, echoing from deeper within the cave. McBride shouted something she couldn't make out. Daniels cursed. And in the distance, more insurgent shouts rose from the valley. Reinforcements. Emily's blood turned cold. The mission wasn't over. Not even close. The night after the ambush hung heavy over the valley. The mountains seemed to lean closer, oppressive in their silence, as if the earth itself was holding its breath after the violence that had spilled across its soil. The Americans had pulled their wounded back to the FOB, and the dead had been flown out under the cover of darkness, their flag-draped bodies leaving a hollow ache behind. Sergeant Riley sat alone on the makeshift wooden bench outside the operations tent, a cigarette glowing faintly between his fingers. He hadn't smoked in years, but tonight the weight of the air demanded it. His legs bounced involuntarily, the adrenaline from the past 48 hours still refusing to leave his bloodstream. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Corporal Diaz's face as the IED went off, frozen in shock, eyes wide, gone before anyone could blink. Inside the tent, Lieutenant Walker was hunched over the map table, the glow of the overhead lamp highlighting the hollows beneath his eyes. He had barely spoken since the casualty report was sent up the chain. Responsibility weighed differently on officers. For Riley, the grief was raw and personal, a brother lost in the dirt. For Walker, it was grief chained to guilt, tethered to the thought that maybe one decision, an order given too late, a patrol route chosen too hastily, had killed Diaz. The radio crackled, pulling both men from their thoughts. Phantom 2-1, this is Overlord. Intel update incoming. Riley crushed the cigarette under his boot and stepped inside, standing shoulder to shoulder with Walker. The voice continued, SIGINT confirms chatter. High-value target codenamed Raven moving through your sector in the next 72 hours. Possible coordination with local cell leaders. Capture or kill mission authorized. Walker straightened, his jaw tightening. Raven was a ghost in their reports, an insurgent commander whose network of fighters stretched across 3 provinces. If the chatter was right, Raven wasn't just a name. He was the architect behind half the IED strikes that had gutted convoys in the past year. Roger that, Overlord, Walker replied. Request full intel packet. Copy. Sending now. You'll have support from Task Force Dagger if things go loud. Keep it tight. Out. The printer whined in the corner, spitting out pages of grainy photographs, maps and intercepted comms. Riley scanned them quickly. One image showed a blurred silhouette of a man stepping out of a truck, tall, with a beard that split into 2 sharp lines. The caption underneath, Raven, likely alias. Estimated age 40 to 45. Riley whistled low. Well hell. If we bag him, maybe Diaz won't have died for nothing. Walker didn't respond immediately. He stared at the photo, the creases in his forehead deepening. Finally he said, "We'll need to move smart. No room for mistakes." The next morning the platoon gathered in the dusty courtyard, helmets clipped to their vests, rifles slung across tired shoulders. The briefing was blunt and direct. "Listen up," Walker began, his voice rough but steady. "Intel says Raven's convoy will cut through the northern pass. That's 2 clicks from where Diaz went down. They think he's meeting with cell leaders near the old stone bridge. Our job is to set up an L-shaped ambush, cut off the convoy and take him alive if possible. If not," he paused, "we end him." The soldiers exchanged glances. The mission was dangerous, no question. Ambushing a high-value target meant walking into territory Raven knew better than anyone. But the mood was different this time. There was anger in their eyes, a raw hunger for payback that only combat soldiers understand. Private Jacobs, the youngest in the squad, muttered under his breath, "For Diaz." The words spread like a current through the group. For Diaz. For the others they had lost. That night they moved. The moon was a sliver behind the clouds, the air sharp with the bite of mountain wind. The platoon advanced silently, night vision goggles painting the world in eerie shades of green. Each footstep felt like a gamble, every rock on the trail threatening to betray their position. At the designated ambush site they split into teams. Riley's fire team set claymores along the western ridge, while Sergeant Harris led another group to cover the eastern slope. Walker stayed near the center, crouched behind a jagged outcrop overlooking the dirt road that snaked through the valley. Hours passed. The waiting was always the hardest. Silence pressed against their eardrums, broken only by the occasional whisper of wind. Riley checked his watch. Almost 0200. If the intel was right, the convoy would appear any moment. And then, faintly, the rumble of engines. The soldiers froze, hearts hammering. Headlights cut weak beams through the dust, bobbing as trucks bounced along the uneven road. Riley raised his fist, signaling readiness. He could make out 3 vehicles, 2 technicals with mounted PKMs, and 1 covered truck in the middle. The target would be inside that truck. But something was wrong. Walker whispered over the radio, "Hold. Too easy." As the convoy drew closer, Riley saw it. The trucks weren't weighted like they should be. No sag in the suspension, no silhouettes of armed men riding in the back. Decoys. "Shit," Riley breathed. The first explosion tore through the night, not from their side but behind them. A fireball erupted on the ridge where Harris's team had been positioned. Screams followed, raw and immediate. "Contact rear," someone shouted. Gunfire erupted from the cliffs above. Muzzle flashes stitched across the rocks as insurgents poured fire down onto their position. The convoy had been bait. Raven knew they were coming. "Fall back," Walker barked. "Form a perimeter." Riley grabbed Jacobs and pulled him behind cover as rounds chewed into the dirt around them. The young private's eyes were wide, his breathing ragged. "They knew, Sarge." Jacobs stammered. "Keep it together." Riley snapped, firing bursts toward the ridge. "You shoot, you live. You freeze, you die." Walker was on the radio, voice clipped and urgent. "Overlord, this is Phantom 2-1. We are compromised. Enemy strength estimated at platoon plus. Request immediate QRF and air support." The reply came with static. "QRF en route. E30 mics. Hold your ground. 30 minutes. An eternity in combat." The firefight intensified. Harris's team was pinned, unable to regroup. Riley's side was taking casualties. Private Gomez went down with a round through his shoulder, screaming as blood poured between his fingers. Riley dragged him back, ignoring the searing pain as a bullet grazed his own arm. "Medic!" Riley bellowed. Corpsman Miller crawled over, working with calm efficiency despite the chaos. "He'll live if we get him out fast." But getting out wasn't an option. Not yet. Above the roar of gunfire, a new sound cut through, the shrill whistle of incoming mortars. "Down?" Walker shouted. The explosions rocked the valley, throwing dirt and shrapnel in every direction. Riley's ears rang, his vision blurred, but he forced himself upright. Smoke and dust cloaked everything, turning night into a choking haze. In the chaos he saw movement. A figure on the ridge, silhouetted against the flames. Tall, with the same sharp-lined beard from the photo. "Raven." "Walker." Riley roared, pointing. "There." Walker spun, eyes locking on the figure. For a split second, Raven stood motionless, watching the Americans fight and bleed. Then he disappeared into the smoke. "Son of a bitch," Riley muttered. The next 20 minutes were a blur of survival. They fought in short, vicious bursts, conserving ammo, dragging the wounded back inch by inch. Jacobs grew steadier under fire, his fear hardening into determination. Even as bullets cracked overhead, he kept firing, kept covering Riley's flanks. When the distant thump of rotor blades finally echoed through the valley, the soldiers nearly wept with relief. Apache gunships swept in, their cannons lighting up the ridges with streams of fire. The insurgents scattered, unable to match the sheer force raining down from the sky. The QRF rolled in shortly after, armored vehicles grinding up the dirt road, dismounts spreading out to secure the area. The firefight was over. For now. But the cost was high. Harris's team had taken the brunt of the ambush, 3 dead, 2 critically wounded. The survivors were pale, eyes hollow, their bodies shaking with exhaustion and fury. Back at the FOB, silence filled the air as the casualty reports were finalized. Walker stood before the platoon, his face pale but his voice unwavering. "They set us up," he said simply. "We walked into it and we paid the price. But we also saw him. Raven's real. He's flesh and blood. And we're not done." Riley sat on his bunk later, staring at the bandage on his arm. His body ached, but his mind burned hotter than ever. The image of Raven on the ridge replayed endlessly in his head. The way he had stood there, calm, untouchable, as if daring them to try again. Riley clenched his fists. They would. For DS. For Harris's men. For every soldier buried in American soil because of Raven's war. And next time, Riley swore, they wouldn't miss. The days following the ambush stretched long and heavy. The FOB had grown quieter, not from peace but from loss. Every soldier felt the weight of the empty bunks in their barracks, the silence at the chow hall tables where voices had once laughed, cursed, or argued. The dead had been flown out, the wounded evacuated to higher care, and those who remained were left with scars, some stitched, some invisible. Sergeant Riley sat on the hood of a Humvee parked near the motor pool, his M4 resting across his lap. He cleaned it mechanically, though it was spotless already. The ritual calmed him, gave his hands something to do while his mind wrestled with thoughts he couldn't untangle. The ambush replayed over and over, each detail sharper, crueler. Raven's silhouette burned into his memory, that smug pause before he vanished into the smoke. Private Jacobs walked up, helmet tucked under one arm. He looked different. Not just tired, harder, like the valley had taken whatever boyishness he still had and carved it away. "You ever stop cleaning that thing, Sarge?" Jacobs asked. Riley looked up, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "I stop when it stops working. You want that to happen while we're in a firefight?" Jacobs shrugged and sat on the Humvee beside him. "Guess not. Still, I don't think you're gonna scrub the guilt off it." The words hit like a body blow. Riley stiffened, then let out a slow breath. "You're not wrong, kid. But I'll take guilt over blood in the chamber any day." Before Jacobs could answer, Lieutenant Walker appeared from the TOC, papers in hand, face set in the grim determination they'd come to recognize. He motioned for Riley to follow. Inside, the operations tent buzzed with quiet urgency. Maps covered the tables, red markers dotting suspected enemy supply routes. A fresh packet of intel sat in the center, stamped secret. Walker wasted no time. "We've got another shot." Riley leaned over the table. The photos were new, clearer than the grainy images before. This time, Raven wasn't just a silhouette. His face was visible, caught mid-conversation outside a compound built into the mountainside. "Source says Raven's holed up here," Walker explained, tapping the map. "An abandoned Soviet-era outpost, fortified but isolated. Intel suggests he's hosting a meeting with regional commanders in 2 nights. This is as close to a gift as we're going to get." Riley frowned. "After last time, you really think this isn't another setup?" Walker's jaw flexed. "It could be. But if it's real, we can't ignore it. Command wants us to lead the assault. Dagger will be on standby, but it's our op." The silence stretched. Both men knew what it meant. Another mission into the lion's den with men already stretched thin, carrying fresh wounds and older ghosts. Finally Riley spoke. "Then we plan it tighter. We're not walking blind again." That night, the platoon gathered in the briefing room. The air was thick, a mix of anticipation and dread. Walker stood at the front, pointer in hand, his voice steady. "The objective is here, Grid 1147, the old Soviet outpost. Primary mission, capture Raven. Secondary, eliminate enemy leadership and recover intel. Tertiary, demolish supply caches." He outlined the plan with surgical precision. 2 squads would approach from the east under cover of darkness, infiltrating the perimeter silently. A 3rd squad, Riley's, would establish overwatch from the southern ridge, ready to provide suppressive fire. Once the assault began, Apaches would circle low for air support, but only on call. They wanted Raven alive if possible. When Walker finished, the room stayed quiet until Jacobs raised a hand hesitantly. "Sir, what if it's a trap again?" Walker met his eyes without flinching. "Then we fight our way out. But if we don't try, Raven keeps killing more of us. And I won't let Diaz's blood, or Harris's, be for nothing." The platoon nodded, the unspoken agreement passing between them. "For Diaz. For Harris. For everyone." The approach began under a moonless sky. The mountains loomed like dark titans, their jagged edges cutting the horizon. The soldiers moved in silence, NVGs glowing faintly, boots crunching softly on loose gravel. Riley's squad climbed the southern ridge, lungs burning with the effort but feet steady. They reached their overwatch point and dug in, rifles aimed at the compound below. Through the green haze of his scope, Riley saw it clearly: concrete walls weathered by decades, a rusting radio tower jutting into the night sky, guards pacing the perimeter with AKs slung lazily. But something gnawed at him. Too few guards. Too casual. He whispered into the comms, "This feels wrong." Walker's voice crackled back. "Noted. Keep eyes open. We proceed." Minutes stretched into an eternity. Then movement inside the compound, lights flickering in a central building, shadows gathering. Figures entered one by one, their shapes distorted but unmistakable. Leaders. And then Raven. Even through the haze of NVG, Riley recognized him instantly. The beard, the posture, the calm stride. He was real, flesh and blood, no phantom this time. "Target confirmed," Riley whispered. His pulse hammered in his ears. Walker gave the signal. "Execute." The first squad breached the outer gate with a muffled explosion, silenced weapons spitting in the dark. Guards dropped before they could react. Riley's squad opened fire from the ridge, precise bursts cutting down enemy fighters scrambling in confusion. The compound erupted into chaos. Shouts in Pashto and Dari rang out, followed by the staccato crack of AKs firing blindly into the night. Explosions shook the ground as claymores ripped through the eastern flank. "Move! Move!" Walker commanded, his team pushing deeper into the compound. Inside, the fight turned brutal. Rooms cleared with flashbangs, hallways painted with muzzle flashes. Blood slicked the concrete floors. Riley's Overwatch team poured fire into windows, pinning down enemy shooters trying to reinforce. And then came the voice over comms, sharp with urgency. "We have eyes on Raven. 2nd floor, central building." Riley's gut twisted. This was it. The moment. But before Walker could respond, the building erupted. A deafening explosion blew out the upper windows, flames lighting the night. Debris rained down and the shouts over comms turned frantic. "Ambush! Booby-trapped!" Through the chaos, Riley caught sight of Raven again, slipping out the rear of the compound, flanked by 2 guards. He was escaping. "Walker! He's moving!" Riley yelled, already shifting his scope. "I see him. Intercept!" Walker barked. Riley and Jacobs broke from Overwatch, sprinting down the ridge. Bullets whizzed past, kicking up dirt, but they didn't stop. Their legs pumped like pistons, hearts pounding. They reached the rear of the compound just as Raven's group darted toward a waiting pickup. Riley raised his rifle and fired. 1 guard dropped instantly. The second spun, returning fire, rounds snapping close enough to taste. Jacobs shouted, "I got him," and emptied a burst, the guard collapsing. Raven dove into the truck, engine roaring to life. The vehicle lurched forward. "Not today," Riley growled, pulling a grenade from his vest. He yanked the pin, hurled it, and watched it arc through the air, perfect, landing just beneath the rear axle. The explosion shredded the truck, flipping it onto its side. Smoke and fire engulfed it. Riley and Jacobs sprinted forward, weapons raised, adrenaline surging. Raven crawled from the wreckage, coughing, blood on his face but alive. His eyes locked on Riley's, burning with fury and something else, recognition. Riley froze for half a heartbeat, stunned. Raven wasn't just some faceless enemy. His gaze was intelligent, unshaken, almost amused despite the wreck. Jacobs raised his rifle. "End him, Sarge." But Walker's voice cut through the comms. "Alive. Take him alive." Raven, impossibly, smirked through the blood. Then his hand darted to his chest, pulling a pistol. Riley fired. The shot tore through Raven's shoulder, spinning him back into the dirt. The pistol clattered away. "Clear," Jacobs shouted, rushing forward to cuff him. But Raven laughed, a low, guttural sound that sent chills down Riley's spine. Blood poured from his wound, yet his voice was steady. "You think killing me changes anything? There are 100 more like me." Riley pressed his boot against Raven's chest, rifle aimed squarely at his head. His finger trembled on the trigger. He could end it now. One pull, and Diaz, Harris, Gomez, all of them would have vengeance. But Walker's order echoed in his ear, "Alive." And Riley knew his choice mattered. One decision and the war shifted. He lowered the rifle slightly, forcing the rage back down. "Not tonight," he muttered. Raven's eyes narrowed, still defiant, still dangerous. As the Apaches circled overhead and the compound burned behind them, Riley realized something chilling. Capturing Raven was not the end. It was only the beginning. The outpost still burned when the helicopters arrived. The rotors churned the smoke into furious spirals, carrying the stench of charred concrete and blood across the valley. Soldiers moved quickly, dragging prisoners out of the wreckage, collecting weapons and confirming the kill count. But their prize wasn't among the dead. Raven lay strapped to a stretcher, his face streaked with soot and blood, his shoulder bandaged hastily to keep him alive. His eyes, though, never wavered. They flicked from soldier to soldier, sharp and calculating, as if every detail was a puzzle piece he could fit into his plan. Even cuffed and wounded, he carried himself like he was still in control. Sergeant Riley stood nearby, rifle slung but finger never far from the trigger. He couldn't stop staring at the man they had hunted for months. The man who had taken Diaz, Harris, and so many others. The man who had orchestrated ambush after ambush, who had made the mountains bleed. Lieutenant Walker knelt beside the stretcher, his voice low but firm. "You're going to tell us everything. Where your cells are, where the bombs are built, where the next strike is planned." Raven smiled faintly, lips curling despite the blood. "You don't understand. I already told you, kill me and 100 more rise. Keep me alive and I tear you apart from the inside. Either way I win." Walker stood jaw-tight. "We'll see about that." The platoon loaded onto the helicopters, Raven included, and lifted off into the black sky. Riley sat across from the prisoner, every muscle taut, eyes never leaving him. The wind roared through the open bay door, drowning out most conversation, but Riley swore he could still hear Raven's breathing, steady, deliberate, mocking. Back at the FOB, Raven was taken straight to a reinforced holding cell. Guards were posted in shifts, armed and alert. Still, the atmosphere shifted almost immediately. Soldiers moved with unease, their conversations clipped. It wasn't just the capture of a high-value target, it was the presence of him, the man whose name had been whispered with dread, now caged in their midst. That night Riley couldn't sleep. He wandered the perimeter, boots crunching softly against the gravel, the desert air biting cold. Every shadow looked like a threat, every flicker of movement a phantom. He found Jacobs near the watchtower, the kid's face pale in the moonlight. "You holding up?" Riley asked. Jacobs shrugged. "I keep thinking, what if he gets out? What if this is still part of his plan?" Riley leaned against the wall, looking out at the barren horizon. "Then we do what we've always done. Fight. One step at a time." Jacobs nodded, but his eyes never lost that haunted look. The next morning Walker called Riley to the TOC. Inside the air was thick with tension. A man in plain clothes sat at the table, a civilian, mid-40s, clean-shaven, with the detached calm of someone who had seen too much. His badge identified him as CIA. "This is Agent Monroe," Walker introduced. "He's here to lead the interrogation." Monroe extended a hand. Riley ignored it, arms crossed. The agent smirked faintly as if used to the distrust. "Your team did good work," Monroe said. "Catching Raven alive was no small feat, but now the real fight begins. He's a strategist. He won't break easily. Our job is to find the cracks." Riley frowned. "And if he doesn't crack?" Monroe's smirk widened. "Everyone cracks. It's just a matter of how much pressure you apply." The interrogations began that afternoon. Raven was brought into a bare room, his cuffs chained to the table. Monroe sat across from him, calm and methodical. Walker and Riley observed from behind the one-way glass, silent. Monroe started simple, asking about supply routes, safe houses, names of lieutenants. Raven answered with silence, his eyes fixed on the agent, unblinking. When Monroe shifted tactics, threats, promises of medical care, even appeals to ideology, Raven only laughed softly. "You waste your breath," Raven finally said. "Do you think I fear pain? Death." I was born in war. I was forged in it. Every man you kill, every home you burn only makes us stronger. Monroe leaned back, studying him. We'll see. Hours passed with no progress. When Raven was led back to his cell, he turned his head just enough to glance at the glass, at Riley beyond it. Their eyes locked. And for the first time, Riley felt something colder than hatred, doubt. The following days grew darker. Attacks on nearby patrols increased sharply, almost as if Raven's capture had triggered an immediate response from his network. IED strikes doubled. Small arms ambushes harassed convoys constantly. Each casualty felt like a message written in blood. You cannot cage the storm. Inside the FOB, morale frayed. Soldiers whispered that Raven was orchestrating everything from inside his cell, that his men somehow knew every move the Americans made. Riley sat in the mess hall, staring at his untouched food. Jacobs dropped his tray beside him, slumping into the seat. 3 more guys hit by an IED this morning, Jacobs muttered. 2 dead. 1 missing a leg. Riley clenched his fists. He's laughing at us. Jacobs nodded grimly. So why not just put a bullet in him? Because command wanted him alive. Because intelligence believed Raven's mind was more valuable than his death. But Riley wasn't sure anymore. Every day Raven lived, more of their own didn't. That night, Riley dreamed of Diaz. The explosion, the blood, the lifeless stare. He woke in a cold sweat, heart hammering. He got up, pulled on his boots and walked to the holding cells. The guards stiffened at his arrival, but Riley waved them off. He stood outside Raven's cell, staring in. Raven sat on the cot, perfectly calm as if waiting for him. His eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. You, Raven said softly, his accent thick but his English sharp. The sergeant. You pulled the trigger. You could have killed me. But you didn't. Why? Riley gritted his teeth. Because you're more useful alive. Raven smiled faintly. That's what they tell you. But I know the truth. You wanted to. You still do. I saw it in your eyes. Riley stepped closer to the bars, rage boiling. You're alive because I chose it. Don't mistake mercy for weakness. Raven leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. Mercy? No. You're already mine. Every day I live, your men die. And you wonder, was it my bullet or your choice that killed them? The words cut deeper than Riley expected. He turned and walked away before he did something irreversible. But Raven's quiet laughter followed him down the corridor. 2 days later, chaos erupted. The FOB came under mortar fire at dawn, shells slamming into the compound with brutal precision. Soldiers scrambled for cover as explosions rocked the ground. 1 round landed near the fuel depot, igniting a massive fireball. Smoke billowed across the sky. Riley rushed to the TOC, shouting orders, dragging wounded back under cover. Through the chaos, he caught sight of Walker sprinting toward the holding cells, shouting into his radio. Secure Raven. Do not let him out. Riley's gut turned cold. This wasn't random. This was coordinated. By the time Riley reached the cells, he found 2 guards down, blood pooling beneath them. Raven's door was open. Empty. God damn it. Riley roared. They searched frantically, alarms blaring across the FOB. But Raven was gone. Vanished like smoke. The realization hit with crushing clarity. The attack wasn't just to wound them. It was to free him. As the fires raged and medics scrambled to save the injured, Riley stood in the wreckage, chest heaving, fury burning hotter than the flames. Raven had played them all. From the ambush to the interrogation to the prison break. And now he was free again. But this time Riley swore it would end differently. Because now it wasn't just war. It was personal. The air in the desert was heavy with dust and smoke. The sun had begun its slow crawl downward, bleeding orange and crimson streaks across the horizon as though even the sky bled from the battles below. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell lay in the dirt, her uniform caked with dried blood that wasn't all her own. The mission that had begun days ago, the mission that had already cost her so much, was reaching its endgame. And yet, her chest was filled with a weight heavier than her shattered legs had ever been. She had saved lives, yes, but the question that haunted her now was what those lives had been saved for. Her squad was scattered across the battered compound that had once served as a local militia headquarters. Now it was little more than crumbling walls and the acrid smell of spent explosives. Private First Class Torres was propped against a sandbag, wrapping his own arm where shrapnel had torn through. Sergeant Donovan leaned against the wall opposite him, eyes narrowed and rifle clutched as though it were the only thing holding him together. They had made it this far. Against all odds. Against the IED, the ambushes, the relentless waves of insurgents that had poured into the valley like an angry tide. But it wasn't over. The sound of distant gunfire echoed through the hills. The radio crackled with partial reports. Other squads pinned down, others moving to flank. Sarah pressed her ear to the headset, ignoring the way her body screamed at her to rest. She had no luxury of rest. Mitchell, this is Overwatch 2. UAV confirms heavy movement on your 6. Estimated 50+ insurgents moving down from the ridgeline. You need to hold your position. Reinforcements are 12 mics out. Sarah swallowed the dryness in her throat. 12 minutes. They didn't have 12 minutes. Her mind replayed every step of her military career, every decision that had brought her here, but she shoved it aside. This wasn't the time for reflection. This was the time for decisions, the kind that tore pieces of you away every time you made them. She turned to her squad, or what was left of it. We've got company. Big company. We hold until support arrives, or we're all just names on a wall. Donovan smirked grimly, shaking his head. Figures. You drag us through hell just to keep us standing at the gates. Torres chuckled even through the pain. At least it's a front row seat. They were exhausted. Every single one of them was running on fumes, both physical and emotional. But the humor, that thin strand of defiance, they clung to it like a lifeline. Sarah knew it. She felt it too. In war, laughter was often the last rebellion. The insurgents didn't wait. The first crack of rifles split the air, sending bits of stone and dust spitting from the walls around them. Sarah ducked low, dragging herself across the ground to where her rifle lay propped. Her legs were useless, wrapped and braced, but her arms still carried the fire of purpose. She braced her weapon, sighted down the scope, and squeezed. The first target dropped. Another darted behind a rock. A third ran headlong, only to meet the sudden fury of Donovan's fire. The battlefield became chaos. Bullets whizzed, explosions thundered in the near distance, and voices rose in the tangled mess of orders and fear. Sarah's mind was a battlefield of its own, balancing strategy with sheer instinct. Every second demanded a choice: where to fire, who to cover, when to push back, when to conserve. Every decision felt like flipping a coin with lives at stake. Minutes stretched into eternity. Torres reloaded with trembling fingers, cursing under his breath. Donovan kept barking out counts, his steady voice anchoring them. Sarah felt her trigger finger burn with repetition, her shoulders aching from recoil. Yet through it all she kept firing. Not just to kill, but to buy time. She thought of the 40 lives she had saved when she crawled across the dirt after the IED. She thought of the names and faces that depended on her stubborn refusal to give in. That memory wasn't just a reminder, it was a weapon in itself. Pain didn't matter. Fear didn't matter. Only the mission. At last, the rumble of rotor blades cut through the chaos. Helicopters crested the horizon, spitting fire and fury into the enemy ranks. The insurgents broke, some retreating, some torn apart in the maelstrom. Sarah exhaled, the first true breath she'd taken in what felt like years. But relief was fleeting. The radio came alive again. Overwatch 2 to all units. Be advised. Intel confirms high-value target still on site. Enemy commander is pulling back with escort. Last seen moving east toward the hills. Sarah's blood went cold. That commander wasn't just any leader. This was the architect of the bombings, the shadow behind countless attacks. The one who had orchestrated the very ambush that had shattered her legs. The man responsible for every soldier they'd buried along the way. She looked to Donovan. His jaw tightened. He didn't need to say it. They both knew what came next. We're going after him, Sarah said, her voice like steel. Torres looked up, incredulous. Ma'am, you can't even walk. I don't need to walk, she cut him off. I just need to finish this. The decision hung heavy in the air, but no one argued further. War wasn't about convenience. It was about necessity. And sometimes, necessity demanded the impossible. They rallied, what little strength they had left carrying them forward. Sarah dragged herself onto the back of a Humvee, rifle across her lap, pain stabbing through her every movement. Donovan drove, his eyes fixed and determined. Torres manned the turret, swaying slightly from blood loss but holding steady. The pursuit began. Through narrow roads and rocky passes, they chased the fleeing convoy. Dust plumes rose ahead, marking the path of their quarry. Sarah gripped the radio, calling in coordinates, directing supporting units where she could. But deep down she knew this wasn't about support. This wasn't about waiting for someone else to finish it. This was theirs. As the chase tightened, the first ambush came. RPG fire streaked past, slamming into the dirt beside them. The Humvee lurched violently, throwing Sarah against the metal frame. Her teeth clamped down on a scream, but her rifle was already up, returning fire. Donovan swerved, cursing. Torres unleashed the turret, cutting down attackers in a spray of rounds. The convoy ahead slowed. A truck overturned, blocking the road. Insurgents poured out, forming a desperate shield around their commander. The final stand. Sarah knew it before Donovan even asked. "This is it. This is it," she said. They dismounted, each of them moving like ghosts pulled by fate. Sarah dragged herself behind a ruined wall, rifle balanced, eyes fixed. The air was thick with gunfire, the world narrowed to bursts of light and sound. And then she saw him. The commander. Tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in dust-colored robes. His face was partially hidden, but Sarah knew. She knew. The man who had haunted her dreams, whose decisions had stolen lives, whose hand had placed the IED that nearly ended hers. Her vision tunneled. Her breath slowed. She lined the shot. A voice broke through, the commander barking orders in a tongue she only partially understood. But his tone was universal. Arrogance, certainty, the belief that he was untouchable. Not today. Sarah squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked. The commander staggered, clutching his chest. He fell to the dirt, eyes wide in shock, and then closed forever. For a moment, silence swallowed everything. Donovan's voice came low, steady. "Target down." Torres let out a ragged laugh, half relief, half disbelief. Sarah lowered her rifle, her hands trembling. The war wasn't over. It never truly ended. But for now, for this single moment, they had cut the head off the snake. Reinforcements arrived minutes later, sweeping the area, securing prisoners, treating wounds. But Sarah felt none of it. She stared at the horizon, the fading sun casting long shadows across the desert. The cost had been unbearable. The choices had carved scars deeper than her wounds. But they had held the line. They had fought. And they had won at least this battle. As the medics lifted her onto the stretcher, Sarah caught Donovan's eye. He nodded once, wordless respect passing between them. Her body was broken. Her soul was scarred. But her spirit was unbroken. And somewhere in the fading echoes of war, a new silence began. One that carried both peace and warning. Because for every enemy defeated, another waited in the shadows. Sarah closed her eyes, the stretcher swaying as it carried her toward the helicopter. The desert wind whispered against her face. Victory had been claimed, but the war had not ended. Not yet. The end.